our simulation, even with our drastic cuts, our taxations, our subsidies, and our resource allocation towards different entities, we don't decrease GDP per capita to any significant amount.
So our policy package works in the following ways. First, we need to increase the taxation on fossil fuels in order to curtail supply, for there is a negative correlation between taxation and supply of fossil fuel resources. Further, we need to subsidize renewable energy sources, so that way the effect that you see from our chart here is realized that increases the supply of renewable, I've never talked with a microphone before. We need to increase the subsidies for our renewable energy resources. That way you can increase the supply of the renewable energy resources until it becomes less expensive to produce and be able to keep up with the demand. And a transition time for fossil fuels is necessary due to the carbon taxes that are going to be levied in at a future period in time. The implementation timeline for this gives a nice 5-10 years before it is realized, and then another 5 years before it is fully implemented. A couple lessons that we learned from our model calculations. No matter what we did, agriculture and land use needed to be drastically affected in order to realize a 2 centigrade level. Acceleration of energy intensity is required to allow solar panels to produce the amount of energy required to meet with our future needs. And political feasibility is completely destroyed if there are any policies to limit population growth from now until the future.
Great. So I'll be talking about what exactly our policy entails. So the main components here are taxes that we're going to have implemented right away in 2015. So we're going to have a $6 per kilojoule tax on coal, and we're also going to accelerate the rate at which these are coal-fired plants are being phased out. We also have an $8 kilojoule tax on oil, and then natural gas is getting a smaller $4 a kilojoule tax, and we're reducing leakage from 3% to 1%. Subsidies are getting the biggest boost. We're giving $10 per kilojoule, and that's to help the market grow so that we can get more investment into it, because that's actually how we're going to tackle this problem, is having renewable energy, as you saw before, begin to make up almost all of the world's energy source, with most carbon sources being phased out. So also we have coming down the road after these taxes, the initial ones, we have an overall carbon tax. So that is going to make renewables even more competitive. The reason we have this coming phased in over 10 years up until 2030, that's when the full rate takes effect, and we have it coming after a short gap, is because right now everyone's reliant on these fossil fuels, so you'd have price shock. But because renewables are getting cheaper at the same exact time and really taking off, as we hit this point around 2020 to 2030, you're not going to have price shock for consumers. And then at the very end, we have a goal set that will reduce the cost of renewable energy by 75% due to advancement at that point. So we've really timed these together so that there isn't any price shock for consumers. GDP doesn't take a hit, as you saw on the chart. There's no dip at that point when we transition over. So we have smooth growth and a smooth transition to our renewable sources. So as you can see here, in the status quo, we're still using fossil fuels for most of our energy. Here, we're actually phasing them out right along the time that we're going to see that technological boost and see those taxes come in. Oil is still going to be around because we need it for transportation. It's easier to move around. But as technology for batteries and storage kick off, we'll see oil begin to go down too. And nuclear power is also slowly going to be phased out as safer renewable sources are available.
So one of the things that was key in the compromise was to look at the big picture. And two of the sectors that had to compromise the most, as you can see, are energy efficiency and agriculture and land use. And basically what the strengths, the overall strengths we saw for the policy was that there's going to be an increase for renewable energy and new technology coming in to deal with these renewable energy sources. The major weakness we saw across the board was with the cost, because with this new technology there is a cost, and then you have certain industries that are dependent on the high use of energy. But the threats that we were seeing kind of overall across the board was cost as well, and stakeholder contentment. And you can see the stakeholder contentment is higher where the sector didn't have to compromise too much, where the sector had to have the low numbers and compromise more. They have a lower stakeholder contentment. Go to the next one. Okay, and the implementation of our timeline. So basically in 2015, we'll start with the taxes, subsidies, and regulations, and move on down to 2025, where we have the breakthrough in renewable energy. And then over the next 3 to 7 years, this will encourage fossil fuel transition and a manifestation of investment in renewables.
Thank you.
I think a lot of your plan hinges on that 75% reduction in renewable costs. So I wondered if you had any contingency plans for if that breakthrough doesn't happen, or it doesn't happen in the timescale that you have indicated.
Yeah, so yes and yes, kind of. So the first one was, the first part of yours was, so it's, yeah, so by, gotcha. Yeah, so we're heavily investing in renewables. So we're anticipating that the heavy investment, we are giving a $10 per gigaton subsidy to renewables. And that investment is not only through technological advancement, but also technology transfer. So as we move technologies from developed countries into developing countries, that'll allow us to utilize renewables and to a higher degree in those developing countries, which will help us accelerate. And so that breakthrough is both with technology itself being advanced, but also our ability to share technologies across borders. So I think it's a little bit of bet hedging by allowing the technology transfer to be part of that.
Yeah, and if you go back, I don't know if we can go back, but you'll see that the fossil fuel use is actually decreasing before we have that jump off where the price is getting lowered for renewables. So I think it's more obvious where you have the whole stacked share. Yeah, so that's already trending downward before we really see renewables tend to take off. You know, you already have these sloping down, especially coal, which is emitting the most, before we hit that 2025 date. So it's robust. We played around with it a much. I think it would be robust to changes. There's always, if that happened and we had price shock because we have all these new taxes coming in and renewables aren't there to fill the gap, you could always adjust it, and you'd have a higher temperature possibly, but then you also would have a policy that's politically feasible.
So I'm looking at your energy efficiency and being like supporting my stakeholders who are also energy efficiency. How are you convinced that 3.1 will be actually be able to comply? What if your stakeholders are not happy and that's not even feasible? How would you think you can take care of that problem?
So one of the things for energy efficiency that we had to look at was that the fact that the climate threat, the extreme weather changes, is a threat to the industry. So we have to look at their longevity. So if they don't invest in sustainable energy or we don't address the climate, extreme climate changes, then they're not going to be able to thrive. So we would have to re-image it and repackage it so that they could invest in that. But that's why we decided to stay at that number, because anything higher they'd be extremely unsatisfied with. But that was a comfortable number and where they could see, get that change.
Yeah, the percentage increase in efficiency was only 3.5 for the houses and 3.7 for the cars. And that was within the realm of possibility stated by the energy efficiency sector. So it's not out of the realm of possibility. It's going to be difficult, yes, but it's going to be difficult for everybody. And having energy efficiency be hit decently hard is one of the few ways that we can really drive down the use of fossil fuels immediately.
Could I have your fossil fuels person
That's
up
me.
there? That's you? Okay, so if I follow this correctly, it's an immediate tax on all three forms of fossil fuels, followed by an additional carbon tax, with none of that tax actually coming back to your industry.
No, there's tax coming back to the industry.
Okay, that wasn't demonstrated in your presentation. How much is coming back in terms of offsetting that immediate cost to your industry?
20%.
20%. And you believe that you can sell that to your stakeholders?
Yeah, so we do a delay in the price for carbon, and there's also, right here. What we see is that we don't actually see a strong drop-off in the use of fossil fuels until all the way around 2040. So that's a big point for us, is that is going to give the fossil fuel industry time to transition to other forms of energy, or if they want to go into another sector or develop more renewable stuff, because there's 80% of that tax break is going to renewables. So if they're going to transition themselves to renewables, they'll be getting some of the tax break back that they'll have lost from the fossil fuel. There is the issue that oil or gas and coal are going to near nothing by 2100, but there is going to be still a decently sustained oil industry. These graphs are a little bit misleading because the actual amount of energy once you go that's used in 2100 is way more than the amount of energy that's used here. So if it was a true stats graph and not normalized, then you would still see that the amount of oil that we're using is not, I guess that's in this graph.
I want to see if my other judges
The amount
have a
of
question.
oil
I
that
have
you're
a
using
different
is
one.
not the regular.
For your ag and land person, who's that? For you and the other stakeholders, do you feel you have not just a policy understanding, but almost a experiential or heart understanding about the agriculture and land industry? Because my sense is in the academy, we can get away from the real sense of large scale, small scale, developed nation agriculture and what that would affect in terms of the changes you're proposing.
Obviously, there would be some short-term hardship. I know a lot of agriculture communities, they don't exactly make the most in margins. But with that being said, a lot of the bets that are being hedged on this is to share technology and feeding methods from not only there in the developed world, but into the developing world as well. If we shift the technology that has been seen here in the United States and abroad in other developed nations, we might be able to curtail some of the negative side effects that can be seen from reducing the additional gases that are produced through farm cattle. The total reduction in forestry that we chose to do in this project is only 25%, which is reasonable in the limits of realm of possibility. Of course, technology is increasing at an exponential rate, so more agricultural advances will be seen here in the next 10, 20, 30, 40 years, which will be able to address the further needs to reduce the methane gas and not feel the hardship for the farmers.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.